Let's start with a very interesting story from a user with a lot of numbers. 009645678865433334. Sure, I'll do my job. I'm a young person working in a backroom position at a retail store. I've been working there for about a year now. My management when I started was excellent, and as a result I am very well trained. I never got written up, am always on time, and I consistently do things well above my pay grade. I fill in for my supervisor in the back room and can run it by myself if need be, and I trained our newest supervisor in her position. If you're wondering, I didn't take the supervisor job because it required changing my shift time. I knew all the fine details and was a team trainer as well. Basically, I was a supervisor but without the pay rise. My managers moved on to greener pastures and their positions were filled by new management. The new management doesn't compare to the quality of the old management. Our store manager, I'll call her Karen, is the worst manager I've had the displeasure of working for. She loves workplace politics, acting snaky and micromanaging everything. When suggested solutions to problems, Karen would rather take a less effective route just to be the one in charge. When she messes up, instead of admitting it, Karen blames anyone but herself and makes it their responsibility to avoid looking dumb. Karen doesn't help when she's needed, rarely does her job, takes personal phone calls all day, and sits in her office on her computer. She's rude, inconsiderate, and incompetent. All in all, Karen is an awful boss. I tried to make peace with Karen at first, but we quickly started bumping heads, and our relationship is shaky at best. We're cordial with each other, but Karen wanted me to abandon 100% of my authority while still running the back, which couldn't happen because others come to me for direction a lot. We don't speak to each other when we don't have to. Well, Karen screwed up. One day in the back, we finished with a group activity. Simply put, I had to pee. So once we were done, I told my supervisor I needed a quick bathroom break and headed out to the bathroom. The second I began my business, I got called on the intercom by Karen to come to the back room. I finished up quickly and got back to the stockroom. I was gone about 5 minutes tops. When I walked in, Karen was immediately interrogating me on where I'd been and what I was doing. I told her I'd gone to the bathroom and she continued asking like the answer was going to be different. Eventually, Karen said this absolute gem to me, which she couldn't have known would change the course of our time at this company forever. Karen says, "You need to use company time more wisely and do your job." Okay, remember how I said I was basically the backup stock supervisor at this institution? My list of self-appointed management duties was actually pretty long. Training new people, fixing damaged items, fixing packaging, training the supervisors, doing paperwork, delegating tasks, giving instructions to people, taking garbages out, cleaning the stockroom. The list goes on and on. When Karen said this to me, something clicked. You see where this is going? I stopped all of it. All the managerial stuff went right out the window. Do my job? Okay, I'll do my job. Not your job, not her job, only mine. That's what you ask, right? Direct your own team, do your own paperwork, train your own supervisors, because I'm just a lowly wage, right? Yep, my stockroom fell apart quickly. Suddenly the entire room was in disarray, new people weren't being trained, faulty product was put out, and my new supervisor had no idea what to do other than copy me so none of the paperwork got done. Garbages stopped being taken. People in the stockroom didn't have direction, the floors were dirty, etc. I wonder why? It was a mess. And management couldn't say anything about it because those were management's duties and not my problem. I know that Karen knew what I did, but all she could do was silently fume about it, suck it up and actually do her job. She got pissy with me after this and tried giving me less shifts, but that didn't last. Management finally got involved with the stockroom. I've never been so satisfied with myself, all because Karen couldn't accept that I had to pee. What are you gonna do? Fire me for doing my job? Almout edit, my first gold. Thank you all so much for the awards and nice replies. This was flawless, malicious compliance. Strategic, justified, and highly effective. By doing only her job, Opie exposed Karen's incompetence without breaking any rules. The stockroom's chaos forced management to intervene, proving her value. Sweet, satisfying, and executed with perfect precision. The next story from Hammer Punisher, Massive Refactoring for a Massive Douche, a study in code obfuscation. I am a software engineer by trade and I deal in telecommunications, cross-posting my own post from r/tales from the job. They told me this would make a nice malicious compliance story. This one gets pretty technical, but I hope at least the programming-minded individuals amongst you get a kick out of this. It's pretty long too, so I included a TLDR in the end. In the post I featured a creature called Brutus the Backstabber only briefly. Such a low exposure would do injustice to his unforgettable character, so to rectify that I've decided to give him the top billing in tonight's episode. Brutus. Where to begin? I stand by my characterization of the previous post that paints him as a back-talking human replicate who not only hides knives into other people's backs but steals credit wherever he can. He was also my office mate, with a modus operando. Like an antlion waiting for prey, he would burrow deep under his noise-canceling headphones and keep finger-drumming the shit out of his desk. He was waiting for me to get comfortable in my coding zone. When he deemed the time ripe, he would slam the headphones on his desk with a bang that registered 11 on the Richter scale. This would be followed by him asking for relentlessly demanding help with work he damn well should have been capable of doing on his own and that was assigned to him alone. If contested, he would run to the boss he was friendliest with, complaining I was not being cooperative. If I acquiesced, he would A, hear my advice, invariably scrap said advice and do things his own way, then B, blame me when the thing he coded his own way would not work. Brutus also had a knack for challenging his coworkers, mostly me, picking apart their work, questioning the decisions they had made on their own software elements that were no business of Brutus to mess with. I'm not sure if I can paint an accurate enough picture of this fine gentleman, but if you've read Joseph Heller's Catch-22, you might remember Chaplain Tappan's Corporal Whitcomb, a hostile dickwad incarnate, a dead ringer for Brutus. I don't know if he was gunning for my position, had it in for me for some reason, or was just an all-round asshole. Over time, Brutus got bolder. My office mates saw fit to challenge my work in the bi-weekly meetings in front of our managers and make suggestions what could be improved in my software module. His favorite boss had a raging hard-on for all these suggestions. Why not? They sounded impressive. A specialist, i.e. me, could see they also were wildly impractical, laborious to implement, and questionable to support in the long run. Said boss liked to overrule my opinion as irrelevant. Yet, what do I know? I've only programmed this module for the last 5 years. 5 years. The first 2 had been quite good. My superiors had trusted me back then. They had given me autonomy to do things the way I deemed best. After that, more people, especially more middle managers, rolled in. More politics. Not long after that, enter Brutus. He wasn't the only suck-up/office politician that had entered our firm, but he was one of the most aggressive ones. He had a natural talent for it, always ready with a question, always ready to challenge. The bosses seemed to love that. To play it safe, this textbook definition of a climber also befriended the bosses that mattered the most to his position, went to lunch with them and learned to talk about deer hunting and charcoal grills with them, especially Boss Man the Bigot from my previous story. Whilst Brutus seemed to be thriving in this environment, I wasn't doing so well. All I had been getting lately was more and more middle managers and entitled coworkers to give me conflicting demands, and less autonomy to make my own decisions. I was being turned into a glorified code monkey. Consequently, I was getting more and more jaded with my workplace and the people on its payroll. Some nights I'd been checking LinkedIn half-heartedly, but nothing much came out of it. Now that I look back at that, I guess I was getting a bit depressed. But I didn't realize it then. Everything was just kind of gray. Lately, Brutus had become enamored with the idea of refactoring some major code. My code, that is. Except from the bi-weekly meeting, Boss Man, all right, are there other concerns? Anybody? Brutus, well, the Hammer Punishers module is too monolithic. That makes it hard to test and also inefficient. Me. As I told you before, the module works well. We haven't seen performance problems in the lab or in field tests. True, it could be made easier to test, but there are also these features A, B, and C that I should get done before June. Brutus, speaking to boss, not even addressing me, refactoring the module would be a really good idea before those Hammer Punisher could make algorithms that certainly don't need efficiency improvements more efficient at the same time. Boss Man, that's settled then. Hammer Punisher, start the refactoring first thing tomorrow. Me, how should I go about it? Refactoring is a pretty broad concept. Boss Man, you are the expert, right? You decide the details. Cool, another item to pile on my Mount Everest of jobs. Shortly put, refactoring is making the source code more readable and easier to maintain by e.g., splitting it into several smaller files and adhering to a rigorous standard on naming and formatting the source. Ideally, the process shouldn't change how the program behaves, just make the source code look different and be easier to test. In reality, it is very easy to inadvertently introduce new bugs in big refactorings like this. What made this exercise especially pointless was that the code was already in a pretty good nick. I admit some functions were a bit on the long side and one class could have been made more modular, but then again, no one else was working on this code apart from me, and no one else was slated for helping me out with said code. I wish there had been. I could already read and maintain my own work just fine, thank you very much. There were several more important features in the backlog that needed to be done ASAP, and guess who was going to get chewed up for missing those deadlines? This wasn't the first case of jackassery I'd experienced in this company, but this was the one to wake me up. After that meeting, I didn't feel jaded anymore. I was seething. So they wanted my code more efficient. They wanted my code refactored, then refactored it was going to be. Next morning, I started by compiling a massive to-do list, featuring not only the list of suspected bugs in my code, but also all the inane feature requests written by Brutus in his leisure in the past months. When examining a bug candidate, I decided it would be good to do some refactoring at the same time. They demanded efficiency, and in a way, this would be an efficient way of working. Since I had been given authority to do the job as I best saw fit, I decided my source code was hogging way too much space on our poor servers. It was of paramount importance to refactor the wasted space away. I cracked my knuckles, my kneecaps, and the joints in my neck, then started cracking the first bug, Everybody knows that the fewer different characters there are in a file, the more efficient it will be to compress, right? So, a variable called something as bloated as packet counter, I swiftly renamed to L. Header offset became will. Cur underscore processed underscore bytes, horrible, better rename it lel. What about response underscore time underscore ms? I know, let's make it lol. Whilst doing this and fixing the bug at the same time, I made sure to edit every single line on the files I touched. Streamlining the variable names helped a lot towards this end. I think I got to LLLL in the file that got the L treatment. I peppered most of the empty lines with helpful comments like // every 2 times or // remember to raise flag. I wanted to do as many changes as possible. Because our code resided in a version control system like EGIT, the version control color highlights every line that was changed, so you can compare the new and the original easily. If there are only few edits in a file, it's straightforward to spot the color highlighted changes. On the other hand, if all the lines have been altered, pretty much everything is color highlighted. Also, because of the version control, no disgruntled programmer could have destroyed everything even if he wanted to, as there were multiple auto-downloaded copies on every coworker's computer. Was I a disgruntled programmer? Nay, I was in the zone. I was getting a lot done. Next week I kicked it up a notch. Not content to just rename variables and functions, I shifted them around into different lines to make it harder to compare the new and original versions of the file. While I was at it, I decided to save some space by eliminating all those pesky constant numbers and defines, substituting them with some healthy integers in the code. Some call them magic numbers. I called them economical. Speaking of eliminating, I also axed heaps of unnecessary words, like spaces and line changes. After that, the files made a pretty snug package. I committed the changes and uploaded them to our version control. A good week's work. But I wasn't done yet. Since our code deals in low-level network traffic, there is a fair amount of bit twiddling here and there. For some reason that I can't quite recall, I found it very important to rename all the variables in those functions so that their names contain nothing but the following characters: lowercase l, uppercase O, uppercase B, number 0, 1A. Here is an example of a definition with those parameters. Int oblo 1O equals 0B 110,100. L10, 1, and O1. After tackling the bit fiddling and having given the L, K, and E treatment to several files, I allowed myself some leeway in the length of variable names. I kind of towed the line when renaming the function screen update to screw, so I made amends by designating a variable called uptime a space-saving U. And although a certain subclass in the wireless application object contains routines for interacting with the network kernel stack, designating it wanker was definitely a stretch. Originally, the screen update function didn't reside anywhere near the wireless application, but I went above and beyond the Call of Duty to relocate it there. It was essential to be able to call wanker greater than screw goal. At this point, I recalled that the C++ string is quite a heavy data type with a lot of overhead, so I did what any responsible programmer would do and replaced a couple of these with a pile of numbers that contained the ASCII values of the individual letters in said string. There was also this SQL handler class that was getting too big for its own good, so I split it nicely into 2 parts, calling one of the instances SQL handler and the other SQ handler. I made sure that all of my new code worked, even though it might be a tad challenging to read. In fact, I double-checked these new features so thoroughly that I forgot to patch one interesting abnormality. The program featured a debug print that, at a point, outputs a couple of characters from an uninitialized memory space to the terminal every now and then. As the memory is initialized, these characters can be anything from letters to invisible control characters. When a test has been running for several hours, say overnight, the print has a tendency to spontaneously output some kind of terminal control sequence that turns all the text in the terminal window irreversibly into an unintelligible mush of weird symbols. It's pretty funny if you have left the test running overnight and relied on the terminal output to debug the results. I knew this, but Brutus didn't. As he was never industrial enough to pull thorough testing sessions, he was also too lazy/confident/efficient to ever check on my progress on the great refactoring of 2019. Too bad. He could have caught these atrocities and maybe alerted some higher up to put a stop to them. During the next few weeks, I made sure to intertwine every bug fix I made with a ton of helpful refactorings. Even with the help of version control, it's pretty much impossible to extract the useful modifications from the jumble of obfuscation without days and weeks of manual labor. You could revert back to the version before all of my refactoring, but then you would lose all the new features and bug fixes, some of which are critical. Why the hell did I make such a mess of my code, you might ask? Well, say I was to not come to work anymore one pretty morning. Say I was to leave the company for good. If such was the case, the responsibility for my code would be handed to the coworker that was next on the line. Someone who has proved himself the most versed on the subject, willing and able. And as my bosses had witnessed in so many bi-weekly meetings regarding this particular software, the one with the most excellent knowledge was Brutus the Backstabber. You see, because of this incident, and a lot of other stupid crap, I had finally found the energy to get back to the game of job hunting, fueling the seek with my rage. After a couple of bad offers and fizzled interviews, I landed a pretty good candidate. A long and convoluted negotiations process ensued. I wanted to make sure I would not end up in a clone of my current company. Finally, I signed papers with a new firm, with a better salary and more interesting job prospects. Brutus's face was a sight worth seeing when I dumped a pile of feculent Frankenstein code on him and waved the sweet goodbye, but that's a story for another time. After all, the great refactoring was only the pettier of the two going-away gifts I dedicated to my beloved company. The other one was much more satisfying. TLDR. A climber of a workmate gets ahead at my expense, getting our boss to make me do pointless huge changes to my soft. Boss never specifies the way to implement the changes. I employ creativity to turn the code into a steaming quagmire of guano that works but is unreadable. I quit. The climber gets the now illegible code dumped on him. The malicious compliance was brilliantly executed, technically sound, yet frustratingly unreadable. By maintaining functionality while making the code indecipherable, the revenge was subtle, yet devastating. Brutus and management got exactly what they asked for, proving that sometimes improvement comes at a painful cost.